What are citizen developer programs? And why should companies develop and promote them? That's what we're talking about on this episode of Dynamic Developer. I'm your host, Bill Detweiler, and on today's show, I'm talking with Marcus Torres, GM of IntegrationHub and VP of Platform Product for ServiceNow. He's joining us once again to talk about citizen developer programs. Marcus, thanks for coming back to Dynamic Developer.
Thanks for having me again, Bill.
Yeah, so last time that you and I spoke, we were talking low code and no code, and we were talking about it also as how it empowers organizations, especially now with COVID, to rapidly change their processes and adapt to sort of our changing environment. Now something else, and you touched on this in our previous conversation, that companies, that organizations, that the developers are using to respond to COVID, and it are citizen developer programs. Tell me a little bit about, but we didn't have time to talk about it then, so I'm really excited, and thank you for coming back to talk about it now. What are citizen developer programs?
Yeah, well, first let's start with the citizen developer. The easy answer is there's not a straight answer. Not everyone agrees on what a citizen developer is, but the premise is always the same, which is let's allow a broader, a group of the organization to actually innovate and create custom applications on a platform or a low-code platform. Now, for some of ServiceNow's customers, citizen developers are true developers that just work in a line of business. For other customers, they are literally, no-code business analysts that are familiar with, tools and technology, whether that's Excel or various aspects, and can write a line of SQL. Either way, what a citizen developer program is all about is it's a program of innovation where that innovation isn't centralized to either IT or a core development group, and really about broadening the landscape of who can develop and innovate and deliver value for the business and the customer.
Okay, I think that that's really interesting. How has if there is a or I guess maybe a better way to ask this is, when you talk to your customers about doing this, or that as something that they should be doing within their organizations, what are the ways that, I guess the first answer is, and you kind of touched on this, why? And I guess, we go back and forth, IT goes through cycles where you have everything's decentralized and everything's embedded. You've got analysts and developers embedded with the business units, and then there seems to be a regulatory or something happens and it comes back to centralized IT, and we talk about DevOps and DevSecOps, and sort of there's other types of ways to blend development and operations and security. We go through different kind of cycles, and this seems to be a swing back into the time where we're thinking about, look, we've got to empower more people to be able to iterate more quickly. Talk about, and the companies that you talk to, your ServiceNow's customers, what are they saying about, yeah, this makes sense. I should, why, I see maybe the value in this, and I should do this. I guess what is the thought process behind going back to this decentralized development kind of process, as opposed to doing something, in a big sort of monolithic way, right?
It's about that backlog. If you really want to get down to it, if you were in IT, I was in IT at one point. The backlog is lengthy, and think about all of these teams and these parts of these organizations. They want to be able to control their own destiny. They have certain initiatives, and they can't wait, in a lot of cases, for what I call the app gap. You only have so many developers, like certified or official developers, in the world, and there's way too much demand to get everything addressed. And so what they're trying to do is leverage low code platforms like ServiceNow, and that is ServiceNow's App Engine, to be able to allow people to address their needs for their business or their specific department or their specific workflow in the business without having to rely on IT or some central development group. And that's okay. What you're seeing is there's power in these platforms to do exactly that. And what you're really seeing is different decision factors for these citizen developer programs. And so some of these decision factors are things like, what's the complexity, what's the overall cost, is there time sensitivity or business criticality. For example, if you're a tier one retailer in the United States, you're probably not going to allow a citizen developer per se to go and create the checkout capability on your online shopping portal. But at the same time, that team could do things around inventory management to really help them be more productive as an organization. And so um, but at the end of the day, what it's really about is helping to close, whether you call it the backlog, the app gap, and allowing people to actually innovate and deliver value for their business without having that centralized model, which generally becomes a bottleneck. Like anything in this world, if you have one central place and you have too much demand, there's a bottleneck for it.
So I think one of the things that, and you touched on this when you were talking about the sort of the checkout application. How do you maintain, or how have your customers been maintaining the governance that's required and the guide rails that are required to ensure that maybe there aren't security holes, or there isn't someone doesn't make a mistake that ends up harming the business or causing harming customers? How do you maintain those guidance requirements with such a decentralized development system?
I'm going to speak for ServiceNow, obviously, and what we have put in place, but we actually have something called Health Scan. And what it allows us to do, and allows our customers to do, is really look at what we have sort of best practice rules around development, but customers can apply their own guardrails. And then if as a citizen developer program, as people are developing, and I mentioned this in our last conversation, it's a team sport. They're working with a center of excellence or IT who's reviewing at times their application. And different organizations have different risk profiles. And if you have a platform that can provide different guardrails, and you can make that configurable or customizable based on the kind of role, or in some case the aptitude of the developers, if you sort of segment the citizen developers in different buckets, you can apply different guardrails. So I'll give you a couple of interesting examples of this. So we have some customers who ask for, hey, the second you have an idea for an application, I want you to submit it. It goes through sort of a central team. They evaluate the use case. Does it connect to business critical data? Those kind of things. Other organizations have essentially, think of it as like a training, an internal training certification. Hey, go ahead, play with App Engine, play with ServiceNow, build a few things. When you believe you're ready to do this broader, we have a certification test, and if you pass that, you have not unlimited access, but you kind of have a trust system that allows you to promote certain things yourself. And what it really comes down to, if you really look at successful citizen developer programs, there is collaboration on the use cases. There is a community of developers, not only citizen developers being a community to one another, but also that connection within, whether it's IT or a center of excellence. You establish guardrails like health scan and being able to actually create and configure, think of it as rules that checks applications against those rules. And then there's an empowerment model. There's an empowerment model where the team understands, just like anything, right? The better you get at it, the more skilled you are at something, the more trust is and empowerment comes with it. And it's really, really critical that the business is behind this. And what I mean by that is it is a visible program from the executive level. You have an executive sponsor, and there is an overall, uh, uh, encouragement to innovate. And I think when you take those factors into account, you're gonna get tremendous value. And I'll give you an example. Medtronic is a customer of ours. They developed a citizen developer program with about 25-ish or plus employees, and they accounted for 44% of all the various changes we were seeing in ServiceNow because they were innovating themselves, right? Suncor is another great example where they created a back to work app for COVID-19 using App Engine, and they rolled that out to 16,000 employees. And what they quoted was saving about 90% of their development effort traditionally development if they did that full stack versus using a low code platform. But in both cases, they had an empowerment model, they had a sponsorship by the business and by executives, and they created that community to really make sure that those outcomes and the value that they were delivering had visibility and had governance and had overall support by the rest of the organization.
So I think that's really important. You touched on sort of executive buy-in or business unit buy-in. You talked about executive leadership, right? So it kind of comes down. What are the other key factors for setting up a program like this in your org if you don't have maybe a history of development within the different lines of business or within small teams? And maybe that's something you can touch on too, which is how far down is the right mix for citizen developers? I mean, is it to use an old school term, end user? Is it pushed down that far? Is it someone, and you talked a little bit about sort of you talked a little bit about pro developers and we talked about low and no code developers. But how I guess talk a little bit about, I'm thinking about sort of just the mechanics of the process. You've got executive buy-in, you've got people that say, yeah, we want to do this. You've got business units that want to do this. What are some of those other steps that organizations need to take to make this work?
Well, if I was gonna again, if you have a supported citizen developer program in your organization, at the end of the day, you want everyone to feel it's trusted. And if there's three pillars you want, it's guardrails, visibility, and community. But in kind of the first part of your question, you asked, well, what if I don't have that?
Right. That's what I mean. Like,
how do I get started?
How do we get started with this? Yeah.
That's right. Quick wins, honestly, quick wins. And what I mean by that is when you don't have an organization that is pushing or advocating for a citizen development program, that doesn't remove the fact that you have a need for one, which is there are people and there are departments that want to be able to improve various workflows and parts of their job, and to automate it, to integrate it, to digitize it, but they feel they're potentially handcuffed because there's not a developer program. Then great, get that operational team, try it out. Like, go to developer.servicenow.com, get a version of App Engine and App Engine Studio and start to play around. And what you'll quickly find is you can start to get value. And once you can show that value, right? Once you can demonstrate, get a couple quick wins, pick a use case, start to build that out. And if you start to show that value to your organization, to your manager, to your second line manager, to the organization as a whole, no one says no to value. That's the trick.
Nothing succeeds like success, right? There you go.
That's right. And as far as sort of the persona, if you will, of where it should go, I really see in those cases when you don't have sort of that established program what I call the power user, right? It's not always anyone can use a low code platform. And I'd advocate anyone to try. But usually what happens is you have that what I call the power user, someone who's in a given department, who's constantly trying to improve things and make things better, and they're sort of the hacker, and they go and they try things out, and they try to make things a little bit more efficient, and that person tends to be a little bit more familiar with tools, a little bit more familiar with technology, and they're usually the person who can um, take on a given low code platform, get value out of it, learn it, and then sort of rinse and repeat that with others. And the one thing I would probably add to this is every low code platform has its similarities, but they all have, I want to say, a familiarity curve, right? Like you have to get used to what it does. And yes, there's very, very simple, let's call it Excel like low no code platforms out there, but you hit a complexity cliff pretty quickly. And so if you have a power user, they can go further, they can understand the platform without a lot of help, and then they can really grow that in the organization.
That's something I wanted to touch on is so we're talking about sort of from a macro level, how you kind of, the importance of wanting to do this in the organization, having the support within the organization, where the support should come from, the C-suite, and then the business leaders, a line of business heads as well. And then we're talking about how to identify the individuals within the organization that aren't already within your development org who might be good candidates for this. And that's something, and that was something I wanted to touch on and go further with off on an offshoot of something what you talked about with the complexity cliff, that ramp up. How do you recommend businesses, and are you seeing what are the best practices from some of the orgs like you mentioned who are doing it right? Once they identify that individual, what then is the next step? But beyond sort of saying, hey, look, we have a platform that enables it, whether it's ServiceNow or whatever other kind of, platform you have working, in your organization that enables this. So assuming you have that, because if you don't have that, then you kind of need to, that's something you'll need to do. But assuming you have that, what's then that next step? Is it, hey, look, we've identified you because your manager has come to us. You've come to me and said, you're interested in this. I'm going to give you 90%, 10% time, 20% time to work on this, to do tutorials. How do you close that skills gap to take that person from power user to citizen developer?
Encouragement and empowerment. There's nothing that stifles innovation by more than trying to give somebody that as their second job, right? The reality is time is always a factor for all of us, in regards to how much we have to get done in the activities we have during our normal job. And the reality is when you look at those power users, one, they usually self-select to some degree, but who are those people who are like, hey, I want to innovate, I want to try something new here, I want to do something different, or I want to improve this process. And those are the folks who get satisfaction by going and tinkering around and creating value and getting that quick win. um uh the real benefit, though, is once you identify that person, encourage them and empower them. Give him or her like that time, half a day a week, or just set up a hackathon. In all honesty, like try it out, and pick a use case and go for it. Encourage them, because if you don't, and it's sort of an assigned, aspect, hey, your job is now to do this, it's that's where it doesn't necessarily breed success all the time. But when you can give that encouragement and you can give that empowerment, you create grassroots. And guess what? When someone gets value, they share it with somebody else. They get value, they become their own community, and it just sort of explodes from there.
So do you see it more as would you see a person who gets identified and sort of brought into the program and sort of the tinkering as this becomes, as they transition maybe from what they were originally doing to development full time, or does it stay really more of just um, another tool in their toolbox to use when the need arises? What have you seen works best, or does it really depend on the organization, the individual, the line of business? What have you seen with that respect?
In all honesty, I've seen it all. We've had a one of the active member in our developer community literally was an office manager of a law office in San Francisco, California, and a pretty big law office. And he was just trying to do something different. He didn't want to be an office manager the whole time, and answered the door and addressed sort of clerical items. He really wanted to innovate, and he ended up training himself on our platform at his own desire. And he actually is now the CTO of his own kind of boutique firm that helps with ServiceNow. That now we've also seen people um, understand, like, hey, I'm in this department, this is my operational role, but they're the go-to person now for their organization for digital transformation. And we've seen other people become chief digital transformation officer, which is now a title if you search on LinkedIn here and there. So we've really seen it all. And what I would say is, for anybody who you know understands and appreciates the value of not only innovating, but really kind of seeing the byproduct of your effort, right? Just try it. And if you try it and you start to get those quick wins, as we described earlier, there is no ceiling to what you can achieve, because in some cases they become full developers, right? And keep growing. In other cases, they become sort of the organizational hero for their business unit. And it's really up to them. But you have to start by giving it a shot.
Do you think we've entered a new sort of phase of developer, software engineer, coder, whatever you call it? I mean, I remember I started writing BASIC way back in the day, wrote Pascal, wrote COBOL, I mean, and there was there was a very definite, at least, conceptualization or path or how you started for what software engineers, people that wrote code, whatever you wanted, whatever the title was. But you and I talked about this a little last time, which is we seem to be in a new phase with the current generation, and not just the current generation, but even folks who, date myself, my generation, whatever that is, who are, but who are curious and like to learn. And now the tools are available to allow people maybe who didn't have sort of a traditional background to add value to the organization, to grow their own professional career, to grow their own careers, to do a lot more. And that seems that we're in a new place, that we need to rethink what it means to be a quote unquote developer. What do you think? Are we in a new place?
Absolutely. But anybody can be an innovator. Anybody can be a developer. The question is how far are you going to go? Right? Like I feel I'm very technical in the sense I can write some code. I can go have, pretty in-depth technical conversations with, senior architects here at ServiceNow. But am I going to be the person who's developing our next, world-class SaaS application from scratch? Nope. And the reality is, there are everybody can leverage low code platforms to innovate and be a developer. do people then decide that that is their new career, that is their calling, and they will become the, Jedi Knight of developers, full stack developers that can jump on, platforms like AWS or Google Cloud and literally do everything from scratch? Up to them. And if
Right.
they get started and they find like this is where their joy is, take it, run with it.
And you need all types. I mean, that's not, and I think that's where you're kind of going, because if that's what you see envision for yourself and you want to do, and it's your joy, as you say, then by all means do that. But there are also lots of other paths that are just as valuable and can, be just as important to an organization, and, just as, contribute to your own success as that. And we kind of need that, right?
Absolutely. Think of it as like a hiring sense or your resume, right? I imagine a time, and it's probably already today, where people are going to put on their resume, I know App Engine on ServiceNow, right? I know certain low code platforms. In the same way, if you're a professional developer and you're hired, in a peer of mine, Joe Davis, who leads, our core development, R&D group, from an engineering perspective, he's looking for, people that have very specific skill sets, right? JavaScript, Java,
Python and Kotlin and whatever you want to. Yeah.
you name it. And because he is hiring, a full stack developer, and that is what they do day in, day out. They know how to use automation tools and Selenium and, CI/CD patterns and all of those kind of things. That is a what I would call a professional developer track. We need those. Those aren't going away. Low code's not displacing them. And for the developers who are listening to this, they may say, yeah, well, that's what a real developer is. Absolutely. But you know what? There's another class of developers that is now being empowered by technology. And those low code developers are going to say things like, I know how to build on ServiceNow. I know how to build custom applications with App Engine, and they can achieve and deliver, critical mission critical value applications to an organization without necessarily having all that skill set. And the reality is certain applications require one and certain applications require the other. But the reality is we all work together to provide value for the customer. And I think that's the new age we're in, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Well, Marcus, I think that again is a perfect sentiment to end our interview on. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. Nice to see you again.
And thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. You can listen to more episodes of Dynamic Developer on your favorite podcast platform, or watch a video of each episode, as well as read a transcript at TechRepublic.